The figurehead is one of them. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, when I think of being a figurehead, I think immediately in the different things that I might have done, right? So as I was stating earlier on about this whole Trump
Mm,
Pence administration, that led to a lot of strife. And I think the challenges and rewards of doing this kind of work is always very interesting. I've done so this has been one of the core pieces as far as the profession is concerned, having served on various different committees, given my service to the organization.
mm,
And then also on another level, a leadership position within the institution that I work in, right, currently. So I think that
mhm,
there are some things that are very interesting. What becomes challenging in this is that people who ally with you is fantastic. But when people don't ally with you, that is very
mm,
hard, because what happens then is the fear, the shame, the guilt that gets
mm,
projected onto you, right? That becomes a big issue as far as I'm
mm,
concerned. So you see that commonly happen where people are upset at you because you've sort of disturbed the status quo. And I
mm,
think that happened uh, in the profession after 2017. Um, and people didn't know really how to manage these feelings that have been, these kind of feelings
mm,
that have emerged for folks. They really didn't know what to do with it. And I think for us there was tremendous anger,
mm,
um, that the profession had unapologetically aligned themselves with the Trump Pence administration.
mhm,
And Mrs. Pence, of course, represented something larger, not as an individual. And I think the problem in therapy is that people always come back to the individual and keep saying,
mm,
but she's a good person. And I said, I have no doubt that she's a very good person.
mhm,
But the problem really here is not about her being a good person, but the policy. She has the power to enact policies, right?
mhm,
One good example would be of the school that in Virginia, and I think they had a policy of no students could be LGBTQ or out, or they would be dismissed. And she had aligned with that. So I think that
mhm,
was a really interesting piece to say, look, these are her policies. Not that she meets a person who might be, uh, you know, who might ascribe to a different gender sexuality, and she's not accepting of them. So it's not on a personal level, but it's on a systemic level. So conveying that
mhm,
was a really hard thing to do. Another example of that would be, when my book came out, I asked that my book be reviewed by the Art Therapy Journal. And nobody in the field of art therapy was willing to review my book. And it finally did get reviewed, but it got reviewed by a social worker who was actually the wife of another colleague, which I'm so grateful for her to do it, and it was a good review. But when you begin to think in ways in which you become sort of the target uh,
mm,
of other people's conflict, right? So this is what I mean by projection. So there is, I mean, I
mm,
felt like I received um, um, it was a space that was deeply hurtful because of
mhm,
all the work that my I and my colleagues had given to the profession. And then all of a sudden there was this rift. But we see what happened, right, with the Trump Pence administration, how it even families split. So yeah, I mean, I think so. I hope I'm answering a question that, the challenges of doing this kind of work for everybody is going to be great. It's the same thing about being chair of a department too, right? Like at some point, you're not going to meet the the demands of your colleagues, and you have to make certain decisions, and then they get upset at you. Anyway, so that said, I feel like it is really pivotal to be thinking about leadership positions and the kind of support that people need. And also, it's a learning experience. I
mm.
mean, in retrospect, when I look back, I feel very grateful for the work we have done.
Just out of curiosity, of all the roles that you play,
Yeah,
what's the role that you enjoy the most?
yeah. Yeah, I know. So, I think I thought a lot about, what roles do I play? And I think this was a little moment in my life as an activist. And I don't I don't, it's not that I don't embrace that identity. I think I've been an activist at heart forever. And that's something that comes from my upbringing. That's something that comes also from my my religious upbringing, you know. So this idea of service and the idea of standing up for injustice is just so ingrained into me. I embody it. And that's like my Achilles heel. Like if something's going wrong, I'll be the first one to stand up and say, oh, wait a second. You know, I will stand up for the underdog, really. I mean, at any time. But that said, I also feel that, you know, to embrace activism, I don't do the kind of work that activists really do. I mean, they are day in and day out. That is how they live and breathe. So I lean more towards being an educator, an art therapy facilitator. I love facilitating craft practices, right? That's my big thing. I love collaborations. I find, community work to be very, very powerful for myself. I feel like I learn a lot from it. I like to approach spaces. Like for me, the classroom and my community practice are very parallel. Because, you know, even though I, as an educator, may have the knowledge, the historical knowledge, the practical knowledge. But I think what happens is it's in the questions that the students ask, it's in the questions that my members ask, that transformation happens for me, right? That's what keeps me wanting to do this work. Because if I had to go into the classroom and just sort of regurgitate what I know, then I've lost the critical element of helping students in their process of thinking, right? So the kind of questions the students are asking and the kind of questions that they raise for me that I don't have answers for. I think that's what really I love about this. So being an art therapist, I call more an art therapy practitioner because I don't do psychotherapy work. I have done it. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of value for that kind of work. But my focus is really being in community practice, and I enjoy that a lot. I enjoy the aspect of making. I enjoy how the art in the making become a form of critical pedagogy, as a form of living pedagogy. So I'm very interested in these kinds of relationships that give me more to think about. And I do like writing, even though I've taken a pause from writing right now. So there are things that I don't actively sort of engage in, like being an artist. Like, and I was like, I don't really do that work. But this year I could really say that I have done that work, right? I have been in my studio and I have, practiced consistently and done my research. I mean, how making really evolves, and the kind of questions you ask and the kind of research you do. My God, this has been such a wonderful learning opportunity for me. So with that said, I think the collaborative process is sort of really, really important. You know, the person whose work I really love, she only written one article. She's not written many, many articles. She comes from a social justice perspective. Her name is Karen Fosting. And she wrote an article several years ago, and her article really impacted me. And one of the things that she said is that, you know, when you move therapeutic practice into the social sphere, right? And you're encouraging collective participation. In that context, you know, the art object is not about contemplation. It becomes a critical and a communal process. So she's really talking about, like, how do you make we always are talking about the unconscious. Here she's talking really about how we engage from a conscious process in terms of how we name injustice, right? Like once we start working with once we're working with clients, once we're working with community members, I feel a critical component is our own internalized oppression that keeps us wedded to particular ways of being in this world. I find that kind of engagement in a community space allows us to intervene in ways where people begin to think about that, begin to think about the ways in which we are participating on an everyday level in injustice of others, right? And So for me, that when people come to that place of being able to recognize and name the injustice, when they are able to again begin to voice that injustice, that I feel is a very critical piece to what therapy should be, or where therapy should take us, or what is therapeutic and what is healing.